Among history's most remarkable figures, two women stand whose strength and legacy still echo across centuries: Florence Nightingale and Clementine Churchill. Each carved her legacy through courage and reform, shaping nations and saving lives during times of crisis. Let us begin with the first, Florence Nightingale. Florence Nightingale was born on the 12th of May in the year 1820 in the city of Florence, in the Grand Duchy of Tuscany, Italy. What guided this girl from a wealthy British family to walk battlefields and enter disease-ridden hospitals? Why did she reject comfort and marriage to embrace pain, poverty, and purpose? What inner calling led her to change not only nursing, but history itself? The answers lie in a journey driven by faith, brilliance, and resolve. Please watch my full video until the end, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Please make sure to share it with your friends. Thank you. Now, let us dive into the full story. Born into privilege, Florence was named after the Italian city of her birth, just like her older sister Parthenope, named after a Greek city. The Nightingales returned to England when Florence was still an infant, settling into grand homes in Hampshire and Derbyshire. Her father, William Edward Nightingale, had inherited wealth and land and was committed to his daughter's education, a rare stance in that era. Florence absorbed history, mathematics, languages, and philosophy under his watchful eye. Unlike her peers, she was less interested in dresses and dances and more drawn to books and ideas. Even as a child, her calm intensity hinted at a deeper purpose. Long before the world would know her name, she felt an invisible pull, a calling to serve, to heal, and to step far beyond the world of drawing rooms and tea parties. Florence Nightingale's childhood was shaped by an atmosphere of knowledge, culture, and refined learning. Her father, William Edward Nightingale, firmly believed that girls deserved the same education as boys, an uncommon view for his time. He took it upon himself to teach both his daughters a wide range of subjects, including history, classical literature, mathematics, Italian, and philosophy. Florence, however, was not just an obedient student. She showed a rare curiosity and an intense focus far beyond her years. Unlike her sister Parthenope, who leaned toward art and society, Florence was drawn to analysis, observation, and logic. She would quietly study patterns, collect data, and write observations about the world around her. It was this analytical mindset that would later fuel her groundbreaking work in statistics and reform. In the year 1838, when Florence was just 18 years old, the family traveled across Europe. It was during this journey that she met Mary Clark in Paris, a sharp, independent Englishwoman who challenged traditional gender roles. This meeting would become a turning point. Clark showed Florence that a woman could live a life of purpose outside marriage and motherhood. The two developed a lifelong friendship, and Florence began to imagine a life led by service, thought, and reform, not limited by social expectations. These years were not just about book learning, they were about awakening. With every lesson her father taught and every conversation she had with thinkers like Clark, Florence's mind opened further. She was not simply being prepared to be a wife, she was being shaped to become a force of change. For Florence Nightingale, her journey into service was not sparked by ambition or pressure. It began with a whisper she believed came from God. At the age of 17, while walking through the gardens of Wembley Park in February of 1837, she felt what she would later describe as a calling from God. It was a quiet but undeniable moment that stirred something deep within her soul. This calling did not come with clear instructions. It was not about becoming a nurse, at least not yet. It was about living a life devoted to helping others, about sacrificing comfort for a higher purpose. Though surrounded by wealth and social expectation, Florence began to see her future in a very different light, one that pulled her away from parties and into prayer, away from privilege and into purpose. Her decision, however, was not welcomed by her family. Her parents, especially her mother, had different hopes. They wanted Florence to marry well and uphold the family's status in society. Nursing at that time was seen as a lowly profession, not suitable for a refined young lady. Still, Florence remained respectful but firm. She quietly studied, observed, and prepared. Years passed as her sense of purpose grew stronger. By 1844, Florence could no longer ignore her inner voice. She finally declared her intention to pursue nursing, causing great distress to her family. But the choice had already been made in her heart years earlier. The whisper that began in a garden had now become a mission, and nothing would stop her from answering it. Florence Nightingale's sense of purpose deepened not only through study and reflection, but through travel. In the year 1838, her father took the family on a grand tour across Europe. This journey became more than a sightseeing trip. It opened Florence's mind to the struggles of the world and introduced her to people who would shape her destiny. One of the most influential was Mary Clark, an Englishwoman living in Paris. Clark was outspoken, bold, and unapologetically intellectual, a woman who refused to conform to society's expectations. She challenged Florence's ideas about womanhood and inspired her to believe that a meaningful life beyond marriage was not only possible but powerful. The two remained close friends for over 40 years. In the following years, Florence continued her travels, sometimes accompanied by her friends Charles and Selina Bracebridge. She journeyed as far as Greece and Egypt. In Athens, she rescued a little owl from tormenting children and named it Athena, a quiet symbol of wisdom she often kept in her pocket. In Egypt, she sailed up the Nile, absorbing ancient history and reflecting deeply on her own role in life. Then came a life-changing visit in the year 1850 to Kaiserswerth in Germany. There, Florence observed Lutheran deaconesses caring for the sick and poor. She trained briefly at the institution and wrote a report that marked her first published work. This experience solidified her belief that nursing could be a noble, disciplined, and sacred calling. Through each journey and encounter, Florence's vision sharpened. She was no longer just dreaming, she was preparing. The world was her classroom, and service was her path forward. In a society where a woman's future was often confined to marriage and motherhood, Florence Nightingale made a decision that shocked her world. She chose purpose over matrimony. Despite receiving several proposals, including a persistent 9-year courtship from the well-known politician and poet Richard Monckton Milnes, Florence remained unwavering. She admired his intellect, but feared that a life of domesticity would silence her inner calling. Her family was deeply distressed. Her mother and sister, especially, could not understand why Florence would abandon the comfort, protection, and prestige of a well-matched marriage. They believed she was rejecting the very life she was born to live, but Florence had already decided. She would not settle for a life of tea parties and drawing rooms. She was destined to serve, to heal. This conviction did not arise from rebellion. It came from clarity. Florence believed that marriage would limit her ability to follow the divine purpose she had felt since she was a teenager. She once said that if she married, she would have no time for God. Her strength in this choice lay not just in what she rejected, but in what she embraced, a future of work, sacrifice, and transformation. In the eyes of Victorian society, her decision seemed reckless, even tragic, but Florence saw it differently. To her, it was liberation. She had broken free from the expectations that confined so many women of her time. Her heart belonged not to one man, but to a calling that would touch millions. By the early 1850s, Florence Nightingale was no longer just a woman with a calling. She was preparing to act on it. Though her family continued to disapprove, she found opportunities to study nursing and observe care practices firsthand. One of the most transformative moments came in the year 1850, when she visited the Lutheran religious community at Kaiserswerth am Rhein in Germany. At Kaiserswerth, Florence observed Pastor Theodor Fliedner and the deaconesses who cared for the sick, the poor, and the forgotten. Here, nursing was practiced with both discipline and dignity. She immersed herself in the experience, receiving 4 months of hands-on training in hygiene, patient care, and hospital operations. It was intense and often humbling work, a far cry from the elegance of her upbringing. This experience left a deep impression. She later wrote an anonymous report titled The Institution of Kaiserswerth on the Rhine, her first published work. The training she received not only gave her practical medical knowledge, but also reinforced her belief that nursing could be a professional and moral vocation. It was no longer simply a calling from God. It had become a skill to be mastered. With new confidence and clarity, Florence returned to England more determined than ever. She continued to study medical texts, visit hospitals, and quietly build the foundation of her future career. By 1853, she accepted a position as superintendent of a nursing home for gentlewomen in London. Florence was no longer just preparing for service. She was now stepping into the very role she had once only dreamed of, a healer with purpose, education, and growing resolve. The year was 1854, and Europe was plunged into the chaos of the Crimean War. Reports began to reach Britain describing the horrific conditions of wounded soldiers in makeshift hospitals across the Ottoman Empire. Overcrowding, filth, disease, and neglect had turned hospitals into death traps. Public outcry swelled, and Florence Nightingale's moment had arrived. Her close friend and political ally Sidney Herbert, who had once served as secretary at war, reached out with an urgent request. Would Florence lead a team of nurses to the front lines? She accepted without hesitation. It was not glory she sought, but the chance to relieve suffering on a massive scale. On the 21st of October, 1854, Florence departed for the war zone. Accompanied by 38 carefully selected volunteer nurses and 15 Catholic nuns, she set sail for Constantinople. Among her team was her head nurse Eliza Roberts and her own aunt, My Smith. The journey took them to Scutari, a district across the Bosporus from the main British military camp in Crimea. When they arrived at Selimiye Barracks in November, they found chaos. Medical staff were overwhelmed, basic supplies were missing, and sanitation was almost non-existent. Soldiers were dying in droves, not from their wounds but from infection and malnutrition. Florence faced a scene of misery, yet she did not turn away. With compassion in her heart and discipline in her hands, she stepped into crisis, not as a guest, but as a leader. What she saw would change her, and what she would do there would change history. When Florence Nightingale arrived at Scutari in November of 1854, she stepped into a nightmare. The military hospital inside the Selimiye Barracks was overcrowded and filthy. Wounded soldiers lay on bare floors, surrounded by rats and soaked in disease. There was no proper food, no clean water, and no system for even basic hygiene. Florence wasted no time. She took charge with calm authority, organizing her team and assessing what little they had. She wrote urgent letters back to Britain and even appealed to the Times newspaper, drawing national attention to the scandalous neglect of the wounded. The response was swift. The government sent help and, most importantly, resources. She enforced basic hygiene practices, hand washing, clean linens, ventilated rooms, and safe food preparation. She worked alongside her nurses day and night, bringing order to chaos. Though not a doctor, she transformed the hospital's entire operation through structure, cleanliness, and compassion. One of her most powerful tools was her presence, walking the halls at night with a small lamp in hand, checking on every soldier. This act of tenderness amid horror earned her the name the Lady with the Lamp. But Florence was more than a symbol. She reduced death rates drastically. Some reports claim from 42% down to just 2%. She introduced a level of care and discipline that had never been seen in military hospitals before. What began as a mission of mercy had become a revolution in care. At Scutari, war met compassion, and compassion won. During the long nights at Scutari, Florence Nightingale would walk through dim, crowded hospital corridors holding a small lamp in her hand. Silently, she checked on each wounded soldier, her presence bringing peace and comfort to men broken by war. This image, a slender woman with a lamp, captured the hearts of a nation. She became known as the Lady with the Lamp, a living symbol of mercy. But Florence's legacy from the Crimean War was more than poetic. It was practical, measurable, and revolutionary. Through her tireless efforts, she helped reduce the mortality rate, not just by nursing the wounded, but by transforming how hospitals operated. She introduced hygiene protocols, dietary improvements, and efficient supply systems. She kept detailed records and used data to prove what worked, setting new standards in medical care. In May of 1855, she herself fell dangerously ill, but even then, she continued to work. Her devotion inspired not just admiration but action. The public, moved by her sacrifice, raised money through the Nightingale Fund, which would later help her establish the first professional nursing school in the world. She also gained attention from Queen Victoria and British military leaders, who began to take her reforms seriously. Florence had turned a scandal into a movement and done so without asking for praise. By the time she left the war zone, her name had become a legend. Yet Florence never sought fame. To her, the wounded soldiers were the true heroes, and her duty was to honor them with dignity, care, and compassion. After returning from the Crimean War, Florence Nightingale did not rest. She turned the energy of her experience into building something permanent. With public donations raised through the Nightingale Fund, over £45,000, she established the Nightingale Training School for Nurses at St. Thomas Hospital in London. It opened on the 9th of July, 1860, and it was the first professional secular nursing school in the world. Florence believed that nursing was not a job for the untrained. She saw it as a science and an art that required discipline, hygiene, and deep moral responsibility. Her school trained women to become competent, skilled professionals, a revolutionary idea at a time when nurses were often viewed as uneducated and untrustworthy. Alongside the school, Florence published notes on nursing in the year 1859. Though small in size, the book had a massive impact. It was written in clear, practical language, making it useful not only for hospital nurses, but for women caring for the sick at home. She emphasized clean air, proper diet, quiet, and compassion, principles that are still echoed in modern care. Notes on nursing became the foundation of nursing education across Britain and the world. It helped shift public perception, turning nursing into a respected and structured profession. Florence Nightingale was not simply responding to war anymore. She was building a legacy. By creating a school and a guidebook, she ensured that the values she carried through the wards of Scutari would live on, not just through her, but through generations of nurses who followed in her footsteps. While Florence Nightingale became known to the public as a war heroine, her most lasting reforms took place quietly at home. After the Crimean War, she focused on improving public health across Britain, especially in the military, workhouses, and impoverished communities. With data, discipline, and persistence, she became a powerful force for change behind the scenes. Her work with the British Army continued through the Royal Commission on the Health of the Army. She collected detailed statistics that revealed shocking truths. More soldiers were dying in peacetime from disease than in battle. Through these findings, she pushed for better sanitation, clean water, proper drainage, and improved living conditions in army barracks. These reforms dramatically reduced death rates and shaped military health policy for decades to come. At the same time, she turned her attention to Britain's workhouses, places where the poor and sick often lived in dreadful conditions. Florence believed that even the most vulnerable deserved proper medical care. She introduced trained nurses into the workhouse system, replacing untrained attendants with professionals from her own school. This not only improved care but also gave nursing a stronger professional identity. She worked closely with hospitals, local officials, and even members of parliament, often writing letters, reports, and confidential memos filled with evidence and proposals. Though she was often ill and bedridden, her influence never weakened. Florence Nightingale was not just tending to the wounded, she was healing the system itself. Through quiet determination and tireless advocacy, she reshaped how a nation cared for its soldiers, its sick, and its poor. Florence Nightingale's impact did not stop at Britain's borders. Though she never traveled to India, her influence there was profound. After learning about the high death rates among British soldiers stationed in the Indian colonies, she began to investigate the causes. Her conclusion was clear: poor sanitation, contaminated water, and overcrowded conditions were claiming thousands of lives unnecessarily. Between 1858 and 1863, Florence worked closely with the Royal Commission on India. She gathered and analyzed vast amounts of data, creating detailed reports filled with charts and diagrams to make the findings clear. Her use of statistics was groundbreaking. She turned numbers into visual tools, including her famous polar area diagram that showed how disease, not war, was the greatest enemy. Florence believed that clean water, proper drainage, and ventilated housing could save more lives than medicine alone. She advocated for wide-scale sanitation reforms in both military camps and Indian towns. Thanks to her work, health conditions improved significantly, and death rates among British soldiers in India dropped from 69 per thousand to just 18. She also pushed for better healthcare access for native populations, not just colonial forces. In her view, health was a universal right, not a privilege of class, race, or empire. Her influence reached government leaders, including Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, and her recommendations were often adopted as official policy. Florence Nightingale showed that statistics could be more than numbers. They could be instruments of justice. Her pen, her mind, and her sense of duty reached across continents to protect lives she would never see, but always valued. Florence Nightingale's legacy is often framed in light, but her journey was also marked by shadows, tensions, contradictions, and difficult relationships. One of the most debated was her complex connection with Mary Seacole, a Jamaican-born nurse who also served during the Crimean War. While Seacole gained admiration for her bravery and compassion, Florence seemed hesitant to welcome her into official nursing roles. In private letters, she expressed concerns about Seacole's approach and even mentioned her fear that association might harm the reputation of her nurses. Historians continue to explore whether these tensions were rooted in personal differences, professional standards, or racial bias. Florence's views on gender were equally complex. She broke nearly every social expectation for a woman of her class, yet she did not embrace the growing women's rights movements of her day. She believed deeply in the power of women to contribute, but also claimed that men had done more to help her achieve her mission than women had. She preferred the company of powerful male allies, including politicians and reformers, and often described herself in masculine terms as a man of action and a man of business. Her relationship with religion was just as layered. Though she remained in the Church of England, she held unconventional views. She believed in universal salvation, rejected eternal punishment, and often criticized religious institutions for failing the poor. For her, true faith meant serving others, not performing rituals. Florence Nightingale was a woman of action and intellect, but also of contradictions. Her greatness lay not in perfection, but in the unwavering pursuit of purpose through a deeply human journey. As Florence Nightingale's reforms reshaped health care and nursing, her reputation grew into something legendary. She was no longer just the lady with the lamp. She became a symbol of selfless service, wisdom, and quiet strength. Her impact reached far beyond hospitals and statistics. She became a cultural icon of the Victorian era and a pioneer whose legacy touched the entire world. In recognition of her contributions, Florence received many prestigious honors. In 1883, she became the first woman to receive the Royal Red Cross. In 1907, she was awarded the Order of Merit, the first woman ever to receive it. She was also granted the freedom of the City of London. These were not just titles, they reflected how deeply the world respected her work. Her birthday, the 12th of May, is now celebrated internationally as International Nurses' Day. Nursing schools, hospitals, medals, and even entire wards across the globe bear her name. The Florence Nightingale Medal, established by the International Committee of the Red Cross in 1912, remains the highest international award a nurse can receive. Museums in London, Derbyshire, and Istanbul preserve her legacy, and her image has appeared on British currency and public statues. Even during the COVID-19 pandemic, Britain named temporary hospitals after her, a testament to how her influence still guides healthcare in times of crisis. Florence Nightingale was more than a nurse. She became a universal figure of care and courage, her name etched not just in stone, but in the very heart of modern medicine. Though Florence Nightingale spent much of her later life in physical decline, her mind and influence remained sharp. She continued to advise hospitals, governments, and health leaders through letters, reports, and consultations. Even while bedridden, she remained a central figure in medical reform. Her unwavering commitment outlasted her strength. She suffered from what modern doctors believe was a chronic form of brucellosis, likely contracted during her time in Crimea. Despite recurring illness, she never surrendered her mission. From her quiet London residence at 10 South Street, she shaped national health policies, mentored future nursing leaders, and contributed to sanitary improvements across Britain and India. Her final years were marked by reflection and quiet dignity. She had become a figure of admiration not only among medical professionals, but also among everyday citizens who saw in her a symbol of human compassion. Surrounded by letters, books, and memories, Florence slowly withdrew from public life. On the 13th of August, 1910, she passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 90. Her family declined the offer of burial in Westminster Abbey. Instead, she was laid to rest near her childhood home at St. Margaret's Church in East Wellow, Hampshire. Florence Nightingale left behind more than a medical legacy. She left behind a moral one. She proved that with courage, vision, and quiet endurance, one person can forever change how the world cares for its most vulnerable. Her light never dimmed, it simply passed on to others. Let us now turn to another remarkable figure of royal descent. Clementine Ogilvy Spencer Churchill was born on the 1st of April in the year 1885 in Mayfair, London. England. How did this noble-born girl rise to stand beside one of history's most commanding leaders? What inner strength did she call upon as the world crumbled through two great wars? And who was the quiet force behind Winston Churchill, a woman far more than just a prime minister's wife? Clementine was born into aristocratic circles, but grew up in a household marked by instability. Her mother, Lady Blanche Hosier, was known for her social grace, but also for her fiery spirit and rumored affairs. The identity of Clementine's biological father remains uncertain, as her legal father, Sir Henry Hosier, was widely believed not to be her biological parent. The family's personal life was clouded with secrecy, tension, and scandal, shadows that followed Clementine well into adulthood. Despite these early challenges, Clementine showed signs of sharp intelligence and emotional depth. Raised primarily by her strong-willed mother, she was exposed to intellectual conversation and political awareness from an early age. Her education was carefully overseen, and she grew fluent in French and well-read in literature and philosophy. Clementine's early life was not one of luxury alone. She moved between relatives, lived abroad in deep, and endured the social expectations placed upon upper-class women of her time. Yet, within her quiet composure lived a fierce clarity, the strength to one day stand in the eye of the political storm. This was not just the tale of a wife. It was the beginning of a woman who would shape the destiny of Britain itself. Clementine Ogilvy Hosier was born into a family of wealth, rank, and mystery. Her mother, Lady Blanche Hosier, was the daughter of David Ogilvy, the 10th Earl of Airlie, making Clementine a descendant of Scottish nobility. Yet behind the aristocratic lineage lay a secret that would follow her for life, the uncertainty of her paternity. Lady Blanche's marriage to Sir Henry Hosier was troubled and unconventional. Known for her strong opinions and bold social presence, Blanche moved in elite circles, but was entangled in multiple affairs. Their marriage was one of distance and conflict, often marked by separate living arrangements. As a result, the identity of Clementine's biological father was never formally confirmed. Most believed it was Captain William George Bay Middleton, a dashing cavalry officer and rumored longtime lover of Blanche. This whisper of illegitimacy didn't just cloud family gatherings, it shaped Clementine's sense of belonging. Raised in a household where emotional coldness and secrecy often replaced affection, she learned to guard her feelings and measure her words. She found solace in her siblings and in her education, but always carried a subtle awareness of not fully fitting the mold expected of a daughter of the British elite. Though surrounded by privilege, Clementine's upbringing was far from simple. Her noble roots connected her to high society, but her family's fractured image taught her resilience. She would grow up with an unusual mix of grace and guardedness, the outward polish of a debutante, and the quiet determination of someone who had learned early how to navigate silence and suspicion. Clementine's childhood was marked by both privilege and disruption. After a series of familial tensions, Lady Blanche relocated the children to Dieppe, a coastal town in France. This move was not just a change of scenery. It was an escape from scandal and a way for Clementine to begin life somewhat removed from the scrutiny of British society. In France, she encountered a gentler rhythm of life, surrounded by fresh air, sunlight, and books. She learned French fluently and developed a taste for independence early. Yet this sunny chapter was also shadowed by instability and heartbreak. Clementine contracted typhoid fever as a young girl, a severe illness that nearly claimed her life. The long recovery tested her strength and introduced her to the fragility of health. It was perhaps her first confrontation with real suffering, something that would later deepen her empathy and sharpen her emotional resolve. The most profound loss, however, came with the tragic drowning of her sister Kitty. The two had been extremely close, and Kitty's death devastated young Clementine. Grief settled heavily on the family, and it left a lasting imprint on her emotional world. It also deepened the already quiet, introspective nature that those closest to her would come to recognize. Even amid loss and illness, Clementine remained composed, curious, and observant. She developed a poised, almost formal demeanor that served as both armor and grace. Her time in France gave her culture. Her trials gave her inner depth. These early years shaped a girl who would later move effortlessly through salons and war rooms, always aware of the cost that came with composure. As Clementine grew older, her upbringing took on a distinctly international character. Her mother, determined to provide a well-rounded education, sent her to various schools across England and Europe. She studied in Edinburgh, then at Berkhamsted School in Hertfordshire, and later at the Sorbonne in Paris, a rare opportunity for a young woman of her time. Fluent in French and intellectually curious, Clementine developed a thoughtful, analytical mind that often surprised those who judged her by her graceful exterior. Travel became a form of both education and escape. With her mother and siblings, she toured Italy and France, soaking in art, architecture, and culture. These journeys were more than leisure. They offered Clementine the freedom to observe and reflect, far from the restrictions of London society. She was exposed to poverty as well as beauty, to debate as well as tradition. These contrasts sharpened her perception of the world and deepened her sense of social awareness. Clementine was also forming her own identity, one that didn't easily fit the mold of the traditional debutante. While she had the manners and polish expected of a young woman in upper-class society, she also had a streak of independence and introspection. She read widely, thought deeply, and carried within her a quiet confidence. Though she would later move among Britain's most powerful figures, it was these early years, marked by learning, travel, and emotional observation, that gave Clementine the inner tools to face a future filled with political storms, private sorrows, and national responsibility. Clementine Hozier first met Winston Churchill in the year 1904 at a high society ball. He was already a rising star in British politics, bold, outspoken, and unmistakably ambitious. But at that time, their encounter was brief and unremarkable. It wasn't until 4 years later, in the summer of 1908, that fate would draw them together again, this time for good. They met again at a dinner party hosted by a mutual friend, where conversation sparked and curiosity deepened. Winston, often known for dominating conversations, found himself captivated by Clementine's sharp mind and calm self-assurance. She, in turn, saw past his bluster and into a man driven by conviction and vision. Their courtship was quick but intense, filled with long walks, spirited debates, and letters exchanged between London and Blenheim. Then came the day that would mark the beginning of their lifelong partnership. In late August of 1908, Winston proposed to Clementine in the Temple of Diana at Blenheim Palace, a romantic, secluded spot surrounded by trees and the echoes of history. She accepted, and the engagement was announced shortly after. Their wedding took place on the 12th of September in St. Margaret's Church, Westminster. Though Clementine was only 23 and Winston 33, they were entering a marriage that would endure through 5 children, world wars, political defeats, and global acclaim. This was not just a union of love, it was the merging of 2 formidable wills. Clementine was stepping into a life that would demand resilience, loyalty, and quiet influence. And in Winston, she had found a partner who would rely on her strength as much as her affection. marriage to Winston Churchill was never going to be ordinary, and Clementine knew it from the beginning. As the wife of a rising political figure, she was thrust into the whirlwind of public life, social expectation, and relentless scrutiny. Yet beneath the grand speeches and newspaper headlines, she was also managing the deeply personal demands of family and motherhood. Clementine and Winston had 5 children: Diana, Randolph, Sarah, Marigold, and Mary. Their family life was a blend of privilege and emotional complexity. Winston's political career often kept him away, and Clementine bore the brunt of parenting, balancing the emotional needs of her children with the unspoken demands of being a statesman's wife. The couple's parenting style has drawn both sympathy and criticism. While they loved their children, their public duties often overshadowed private nurturing. The loss of their daughter Marigold in 1921 was a devastating blow. Just 2 years old, she died of septicemia, leaving Clementine heartbroken. This tragedy deepened the emotional strain within the household, even as the couple leaned on each other for strength. Clementine also had to manage Winston's volatile moods and intense work habits. He could be demanding, impatient, and absorbed in his own ambitions. But she was no passive observer. She advised him, challenged him, and at times corrected his political course with quiet firmness. Life in the Churchill home was not always harmonious, but it was held together by Clementine's unshakable discipline and devotion. She was more than a hostess or a mother. She was the anchor of a family whose name would be forever etched in history. When Britain entered World War I in 1914, Clementine Churchill did not retreat to safety or ceremony. Instead, she rolled up her sleeves and stepped into action, determined to serve her country in ways both practical and meaningful. While Winston took on high-profile government roles, Clementine quietly built her own war record, one marked by compassion, leadership, and tireless effort. She became a dedicated supporter of the IMCA, organizing and operating canteens for munitions workers and soldiers. These canteens were not just food stations. They offered warmth, comfort, and morale during one of the darkest chapters in British history. Clementine personally visited these sites, spoke with workers, and made sure the spaces were clean, supplied, and emotionally supportive. Her work went far beyond supervision. She was fully present and involved. In 1917, she was appointed chair of the Red Cross Aid to Russia Fund, coordinating relief efforts for civilians and medical personnel caught in the chaos of war. Her diplomatic and managerial skills were on full display, earning her quiet admiration even in official circles. Clementine did all this while caring for her children and managing a household under strain. She endured air raids, rationing, and emotional exhaustion, yet rarely sought public praise. For her, patriotism was not a slogan, it was a daily discipline rooted in service. While Winston made speeches that echoed across continents, Clementine's contributions held the nation's heart in quieter, steadier ways. In war, she became not just a supporter, but a symbol of female resilience and dignity under fire. In the years following World War I, Clementine Churchill found herself in need of rest, not only from war's chaos, but from the personal strains of political life and motherhood. In 1935, she embarked on a solo voyage to the Far East, a journey that took her to Burma, Malaya, and ultimately to the peaceful island of Bali. It was meant to be a holiday of renewal, yet whispers followed her return. While in Bali, Clementine formed a deep companionship with Terence Phillip, a wealthy art dealer known for his refined tastes and quiet manner. The relationship, which unfolded in serene villas and garden walks, was never publicly confirmed as romantic, but letters and memoirs from those close to her suggest that the connection was emotionally significant. Clementine referred to him affectionately as her Bali dove. The Bali retreat represented more than a rumored affair. It reflected a rare moment when Clementine stepped away from her defined role as wife, mother, and political hostess. It was a time for self-reflection, solitude, and emotional nourishment, far from the pressures of British society. When Terence Phillip died unexpectedly just a year later, Clementine was said to be quietly devastated. Though she never spoke publicly of the relationship, it remained a tender chapter in her private world. This episode reminds us that behind the public poise was a woman of complex feelings and deep longing. For all her strength and discipline, Clementine, too, sought beauty, comfort, and perhaps a fleeting escape from duty in the gardens of Bali, a quiet interlude in a life spent mostly in service. To the outside world, Winston Churchill was a towering figure, the voice of wartime defiance and national courage. But behind the podium and beneath the polished headlines stood Clementine, a woman whose influence on her husband's career was both subtle and profound. She was not just the spouse of a statesman. She was his confidante, his critic, and his compass. Clementine understood the pressures of public life and the dangers of unchecked ego. In private, she offered Winston counsel, sometimes gentle, sometimes sharp, warning him against arrogance or insensitivity. One of her most famous letters, written during World War II, reminded him not to be spoiled by power. That candid voice was a rare privilege he allowed only her. Publicly, Clementine maintained a dignified presence. She accompanied Winston to major events, state dinners, and overseas tours, but always remained measured, never seeking the spotlight. Her calm composure balanced Winston's fiery energy. Together, they presented a united front, a political couple rooted not just in duty, but in mutual dependence. In moments of triumph, she celebrated quietly. In times of criticism, she absorbed pressure with grace. She kept household matters stable, shielded Winston from distractions, and provided a space where he could recover, reflect, and regroup. Reporters and diplomats often remarked on her elegance, intelligence, and warmth, traits that softened the image of Britain's most forceful leader. Clementine didn't just stand beside Winston, she helped shape the man Britain came to revere. Her presence was not ornamental. It was essential. Behind the refined appearance and poised voice, Clementine Churchill lived a life marked by immense personal sacrifice. While her husband became a global figure, Clementine often receded into the background, not out of weakness, but by choice, discipline, and a powerful sense of purpose. Her strength was expressed not through speeches or titles, but through steadiness in the face of endless demands. She endured frequent loneliness as Winston's political duties consumed their days and nights. The marriage often required her to suppress her own emotional needs, remaining supportive even during their most difficult periods. Clementine once admitted to needing occasional escapes, brief travels or retreats, not for leisure, but to preserve her own well-being. Her political instincts were sharp, yet she never sought office or public power. She offered Winston counsel behind closed doors, sometimes disagreeing with him, other times helping him revise ideas that would later become famous. She had opinions on war policy, diplomacy, and social reform, but her contributions came through influence, not attention. Clementine also made personal choices that set her apart. She distanced herself from the lavish lifestyle many political spouses embraced, showing little interest in luxury or vanity. Instead, she focused on discipline, dignity, and moral clarity. During World War II, she gave up comforts, raised funds, and visited bomb sites, modeling quiet patriotism. Though she rarely spoke to crowds, Clementine Churchill stood firm in the hearts of those who knew her role. She was the force that steadied the ship, silent, watchful, and immensely strong, even when the waves of history threatened to drown them all. After World War II, Britain hailed Winston Churchill as a savior of the nation. But Clementine, too, was recognized for her years of service and sacrifice. As the war ended, she gracefully stepped into new roles, not as a symbol of wartime resilience, but as a figure of national admiration in her own right. In 1946, Clementine was appointed a Dame Grand Cross of the Order of the British Empire, one of the highest honors awarded to a civilian. A decade later, in 1956, she received a life peerage, becoming Baroness Spencer Churchill of Chartwell in the county of Kent. With this title, she took her place in the House of Lords, a rare achievement for a woman of her era, especially one whose contributions had long been behind the scenes. Despite her elevation to peerage, Clementine remained characteristically modest. She attended sessions in the House of Lords sparingly and never sought the spotlight. Her presence was symbolic, a tribute to decades of public service, quiet leadership, and national unity. She continued her charitable work, supporting hospitals, youth organizations, and war widows. At home, she stood beside Winston during his final years in politics, offering comfort and counsel as his health declined. She guarded his legacy with care, managing correspondence, visitors, and the delicate balance of history and privacy. These post-war years were not just a time of reflection, they were a season of gentle recognition. Britain finally acknowledged that behind one of its greatest statesmen stood a woman of unmatched loyalty, intellect, and quiet authority, Clementine, the noble constant in a world forever changed. Though Winston Churchill was widely known for his political career, he found deep personal joy in painting, a pursuit that offered solace during the heaviest chapters of his life. Clementine supported this artistic escape wholeheartedly, knowing it helped steady his often restless mind. Over the years, Churchill produced hundreds of paintings, many of which lined the walls of their home at Chartwell. After Winston's death, Clementine was left to manage not only his legacy, but also a growing financial strain. Maintaining Chartwell and its expenses proved increasingly difficult. Despite being elevated to the peerage and recognized with honors, Clementine's income was modest, and the pressures of upkeep, charitable obligations, and personal living costs began to weigh heavily. In the mid-1960s, Clementine made the difficult decision to auction off several of Winston's paintings. These works were treasured family pieces, and the choice did not come easily. Yet it was a practical step, one that reflected her lifelong balance between emotion and duty. The sales brought in much-needed funds and also helped share Winston's artistic side with the world, broadening the public's understanding of him as more than just a wartime leader. The auctions, held with quiet dignity, revealed the private burdens Clementine had long carried. Though surrounded by fame and honor, she was never far from the practical realities of life. With grace and pragmatism, she ensured that the Churchill name, and the art that helped carry it through war and peace, would endure without compromising its dignity. Though often overshadowed by her husband in historical accounts, Clementine Churchill has gradually emerged in popular culture as a figure of strength, intellect, and quiet influence. Over the decades, biographers, filmmakers, and television producers have sought to shed light on the woman behind the leader, offering glimpses into her private thoughts, emotional resilience, and moral compass. Books such as Clementine, The Life of Mrs. Winston Churchill by Sonia Purnell brought new attention to her personal sacrifices and political insights. Drawing from letters, diaries, and first-hand accounts, these works have redefined her not simply as a supportive spouse, but as a key strategist and force of stability in the Churchill household. On screen, Clementine has been portrayed in several acclaimed productions. In the 2002 film The Gathering Storm, she was played by Vanessa Redgrave with quiet intensity, offering a vivid portrayal of her role during Winston's wilderness years. Later depictions, such as in the film Darkest Hour and the television series The Crown, further explored her inner world, highlighting her subtle power and unwavering loyalty. These portrayals have helped correct the historical imbalance, introducing Clementine to a new generation. Far from being a background figure, she is now seen as a fully realized character, elegant, firm, and deeply principled. Through literature and film, Clementine Spencer Churchill has finally stepped out from the shadows of Downing Street into the spotlight of cultural memory. Not just as a prime minister's wife, but as a woman of enduring grace and influence. As the years passed and public life gradually faded, Clementine Churchill entered a period of quiet reflection. With Winston gone and her children grown, she lived largely in solitude, surrounded by memories of a life filled with triumph and burden. Though honored by the nation, she now faced the personal cost of decades spent in the service of history. In public, she was treated as a national treasure. Dignitaries continued to send tributes, and she was regularly invited to ceremonies honoring Winston's legacy. Yet Clementine often declined these appearances, choosing instead to preserve her privacy. The public praise, though sincere, could not fill the silence that came with absence. Loneliness became a quiet companion. Though she kept in touch with her surviving children and close friends, Clementine was known to feel the weight of time more deeply in her later years. The grand halls of Chartwell and the stately rooms of Hyde Park Gate seemed too large for one woman, even one as formidable as she had once been. Still, she remained gracious, wise, and modest. She spoke rarely about politics, but was often found reading, writing notes, or reflecting on a world she had once helped guide. Her life had touched monarchs and generals, yet in her final chapter she sought something simpler, peace. This phase of Clementine's story is not one of decline, but of dignity. A life lived in the background of greatness finally found its stillness, not in crowds or applause, but in the quiet knowing that her role had been fulfilled with strength, love, and unshakable resolve. Clementine Churchill passed away quietly on the 12th of December in the year 1977 at her London home in Prince's Gate. She was 92 years old. Though her departure did not carry the grand spectacle of a state funeral, it was marked by deep respect and quiet sorrow from across Britain and beyond. The woman who had once stood at the heart of the empire's storm had taken her final bow with dignity, grace, and silence. Her funeral was modest, in accordance with her wishes. She was buried beside Winston at St. Martin's Church in Bladon, near Blenheim Palace, bringing their lifelong partnership to rest in the land that had shaped their journey. The pair now lie side by side, not as legends, but as husband and wife, eternally bound by history and devotion. In the decades that followed, Clementine's story gradually came into its own. Historians began to re-examine her influence, recognizing her as a pillar of strength whose sacrifices had allowed Winston to rise. Streets, scholarships, and even wartime facilities have since been named in her honor, a quiet nod to a woman who rarely asked for recognition. Today, Clementine Churchill is remembered not just as a prime minister's wife, but as a strategist, humanitarian, and matriarch who helped carry a nation through its darkest hours. Her legacy is stitched into the very fabric of 20th century Britain. Not with loud proclamations, but with poise, wisdom, and unwavering resolve. Her voice, though often unheard, echoes still. What do you think about Florence Nightingale? Was she a visionary nurse, a woman of mercy and science, who transformed battlefield chaos into healing sanctuaries and redefined modern health care? or a misunderstood reformer, burdened by bureaucracy, worn by expectations, and remembered more for her image than her inner convictions? And what about Clementine Churchill? Was she the iron thread behind Britain's wartime resilience, a strategist, mother, and partner who quietly shaped one of history's most powerful leaders? Or was she a figure of fading grace, sidelined by legacy, her strength overshadowed by the fame of the man she stood beside? Were these women the gentle architects of history, weaving change through silence, care, and resilience? Or were they hidden pillars, seen but not always heard, known yet not always understood? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if these stories stirred something within you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more journeys into the forgotten hearts behind history's great names. Thank you so much for watching.